Our guest this week grew up in the Bronx, New York, currently lives in Sonoma Valley, California, and is a pianist and composer specializing in Brazilian jazz. She started studying classical piano as a young girl and began attending the children's program at Manhattan School of Music at age 11. Our guest has a BA in piano performance from the University of Michigan School of Music, and she also wrote for, acted in, and directed a feminist theater group at the university. She's been playing and performing since childhood, and since moving to California, she's performed at many of the major Bay Area venues. Also the San Jose Jazz Festival, and she's headlined the Healdsburg Jazz Festival with the Grammy-winning Brazilian Jazz Icon, Leny Andrade. Our hardworking guest is also the music director for both a synagogue and a Christian church. And, lucky for us, she happens to be a great storyteller. Her effervescent, joyful personality infuses her music in all that she does. We are so thrilled to welcome our guest, Stephanie Ozer. Welcome to Meaningful Musical Conversations, where we have heart-to-heart talks about music and life. I'm Jill Meunier.
I'm Daniel Townsend. Hope you're all doing well. Again, thanks for joining us today on this lovely, rainy sort of afternoon today. We have Stephanie Ozer here in the building. Thank you so much for coming out. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for making it all the way out this long and windy road, right?
It was a beautiful drive.
Oh, good.
Especially seeing some mist and some rain.
Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of
Very,
spooky.
very Halloween-y.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, you've come all the way from Sonoma Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that like an hour drive about?
It was about an hour drive,
Okay.
and it was just great.
Wonderful.
It was just, I could go slowly. I wasn't in a hurry.
Great. Well, Stephanie, I know that you are from the Bronx, and I just kind of want to jump in and hear a little bit about how you grew up. Like, what was music like in your home, for example?
I grew up in something called the Amalgamated Cooperative Houses in the Bronx. It was built, it was a series of apartment buildings and playgrounds and a community center that was built for middle-class families after World War II. And it was kind of pre-condominium, where you bought a little, very inexpensively into an apartment, and basically you got to live there and maintenance was done. And so we lived on the 9th floor, and walking distance to both subways, which I started riding when I was 11 years old. Mm-hmm. And it was actually a wonderful place to grow up. It was a real community where you knew all the kids and all the parents. And it was a largely Jewish neighborhood on one side and Irish Catholic on the other. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I just, music was a big part of my life from the get-go. My parents are not musicians, but they're music lovers. Mm. And there was always music on in the house, whether it was Ella Fitzgerald. My mother was really into jazz. I remember her ironing, playing Art Tatum records, or opera she listened to on Sunday. But also my mother was very interested in what she called what the college kids were listening to. Uh-huh. And I remember when she came home and brought a Simon and Garfunkel album home. Yeah. And I was young and brought a Beatles album home and brought a Joan Baez. And she just said, this is what the kids are listening to. And I had shown an early aptitude for music. Mm-hmm. And so I had my own little record player when I was really young. And I would just listen to all kinds of music, folk, rock, classical, jazz. And I started piano lessons when I was 7 because I would go to their friends' houses, and that was the days when everybody had a piano in their house. And I would just go over to the piano and apparently pick things out. So we got a little Wurlitzer upright in my bedroom that I shared with my sister and my parakeet, and started piano lessons with the woman across the street. And she taught me a mixture of some classical, but I remember doing Fly Me to the Moon. And she kind of put some poppy, jazzy chords into it. And I was so smitten by the different sounds while I was playing Bach and Beethoven. It was also one of the few times that I was allowed privacy in my teeny tiny apartment was when I played the piano. People would leave me alone. So there was a lot. It was a very noisy New York household, to put it nicely.
So how did they end up leaving you alone? I mean, did they? How did that happen?
Well,
because it wasn't true in my household, but
at first I had an upright piano in our bedroom, and so everybody would not come into the bedroom. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, including my sister. So when I was practicing, it was sacred space. Nobody came in the room. When we got a grand piano, the Steinway that I still have, into the living room, people would leave me alone in the living room. So even though I could hear all the activity going on in the rest of the apartment, I was left alone.
beautiful.
And so it was kind of a savior for me, because there was a lot of angst and arguing and intensity in the household. So it was kind of a way to go into myself. Wow. And of course, once I started riding the subways, I was going to Manhattan School of Music on Saturday in Harlem, 125th Street in Harlem, where I was taking theory and ear training lessons starting when I was 10 or 11 years old. And again, I loved it because I got to go to the big city, you know, from the Bronx. I take the #1 train down to 125th Street and Broadway, and it wasn't particularly safe, so I had to learn some city coping skills, and I was tiny, so I learned how to look mean and scary. And but I loved getting out into the city and going to Manhattan School of Music and being around.
So they had a children's program?
It was a children's program, yeah. Yeah, it was called the Preparatory Division, and they often had college grad students teaching the classes. You know, maybe they got an extra stipend or extra credit. So I remember we had these, and I was talking to a very dear friend I met, Elena, who is a piano teacher in New York. She's still in New York. We met when we were 10 in the lobby of Manhattan School of Music, which at that time actually was Juilliard. I'm sorry, it was Juilliard School of Music. Juilliard moved and Manhattan School of Music moved in. And we had this book called Folk Song Sight Singing Reel Book, where they were like folk songs from around the world, but you have to sight read them and sing them at a very young age. And they were beautiful, odd modal melodies. So there were some, and it was in this old building, and it was, you know, in Harlem. It was fun.
Yeah, magical
That's
place.
amazing. I'm blown away. Oh my gosh. How fortunate. What a wonderful thing.
It was wonderful. It really was wonderful. And there was a woman there, the late Cynthia Auerbach, and she put on children's operas every year, where she'd have the college division doing the orchestra, being the orchestra, and all the kids being in the opera. So we did a Ravel opera called L'Enfant et les Sortilèges, which was about a magical kingdom. And so I was singing tenor at the time, because I still have a low voice. So I was singing all these beautiful Ravel harmonies when I was, you know, preteen and teenager. We did Benjamin Britten. We did all these operas, and they were professional productions because it was at the college with a college orchestra, and she was a maniac and got costumes, and so I got the bug for performing pretty early.
Yeah. Wow. So did you have recitals too? Did you?
Yes, I had piano recitals all the time.
How did you feel about them? How was it for you to perform in recitals?
I liked performing. I would get nervous as heck. I mean, and I still do before a show. I get nauseous and I get like, why do I do this? You know, I hate this. But I know I've done it enough times that I know, just let me get through the first 5 minutes and then I'll,
Of course, settle.
When my hands stopped shaking and I stopped sweating so much. So that's how recitals were. But I always felt like I could settle into the music and let it flow through me. In fact, when I was pretty young, I remember listening to people talk about John Coltrane on the radio, WBAI in New York, which is like the sister or the brother station to KPFA. Okay. At that time, it was the mid-'60s. There was just a lot of philosophical discussions and political discussions on the radio and cool music, and I was a night owl, I had insomnia, so I would stay up late listening to the radio. And I don't remember if it was John Coltrane, but I was hearing people talk about music as a spiritual vehicle. And I immediately, it was like, yes, that's how I feel. And I was, 10, 8. And I remember my favorite classical composer was and still is Bach. And I always felt this affinity with Bach. I could just lose myself in it. And I remember playing the piano in the living room and feeling like, oh my God, it's coming through me. It's not, I really had a sensation of the music kind of coming from elsewhere and channeling it through my fingers. And all I had to do was stay with it and be with it. And it was an amazing moment or series of moments. I don't remember if it was just one time, but I just kind of knew that whenever I performed, that was the state I aimed to align myself with, of just being the music, being the vehicle, being the conduit. Yeah. And not to say that my personal interpretation wasn't a factor, but that it was a partnership.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
With some kind of something flowing through me. And
well, as you talk about that, I'm just imagining you right now sitting at the piano at Hotel Healdsburg with all of this energy flowing through you. And for me, you are just there's so much joy that comes through your body, your being through the music. I mean, John and I, my husband and I, we're always just kind of entranced and just so delighted and uplifted by listening to you. And so I really just want to say I really feel that coming through you, that energy. It's strong and it's powerful and it's bright and sparkly and it's like I love it. So
thank you so very much. To hear
you.
that you're experiencing that as the listener, because I didn't know, I'm not aware of how I look, or I mean, my husband's always telling me to smile more, so I've been trying to do that, and because I get so into it that it's not that I feel serious, but you get that kind of look of concentration on your face.
Oh yeah,
and it can look very serious and solemn almost. So it's nice to hear that you're picking up the love.
Oh, yeah.
And the joy.
Oh, God, yeah.
And especially at a club gig, where there's noise. And,
there can be a lot of noise.
There can be a lot of noise. It's not a concert setting where it's so crystal quiet that you're both heightened and more nervous, but also just more whatever, more present, more able to tap into the essence of what you're doing.
Right, because you have the support of this listening presence of the audience.
Exactly. So but somehow I feel it at Hotel Healdsburg. Could be because I've been there for 18 years when it started doing music, and it's just become it's become a home for me. And I have built up a following over those many years, and have also been a headliner at the Healdsburg Jazz Festival.
Wow, fantastic.
And so it just, I feel completely like Healdsburg is a home to me, even though I don't live in Healdsburg.
Yeah, right. Wonderful, God. Yeah, I've seen you play with Peter Barchet on bass and Kendrick Freeman on drums.
Yes.
And I think I saw you with Fabiana Passoni.
You did.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Beautiful Brazilian singer. Just my experience of her, she's just, oh my gosh, so natural, just free. And there's this sense of joy that I really felt coming from her as well.
She is, you describe her exactly.
And she's sensual, she's moving around, and it's like she's just having such a great time. And that just, we all feel that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love performing with her. She comes from a very small village in Brazil, in Minas, in the state of Minas Gerais, and a very small country thing. And she learned to sing from her dad, and she always wanted to come to the United States and be a singer. And she came here when she was very young, spoke no English, moved to New York, and eventually made her way to LA and taught herself English. And she's really a remarkable person. And we hooked up in 2006. When was I on tour? It was 2007 maybe, when I was on tour with Leny Andrade. I'm not sure.
I read on your website. Actually, I'd love to hear the story. Actually, you could tell the story about, yes.
I will.
After.
Yeah, well,
we
met at the tour with her, but to get up to that point, I had gone to, this was 2000. We had just moved from Michigan, where I was living in Ann Arbor, and had a whole music career there in jazz and pop, and did a lot of folk. I worked with a folk singer-songwriter. I basically like to do everything. Haven't done much country western, but just about everything else. Songwriting. And we moved here in the summer of 97, and I didn't know a soul, and we were living in Glen Ellen at the time, which is a very small rural offshoot of Sonoma, and heard about the jazz school in Berkeley, and I started going down there on Saturdays and studying with a wonderful piano professor, teacher, Mark Levine, and he turned me on to something called Jazz Camp West, which is a week-long jazz camp immersion in the Redwoods, south of San Francisco and La Honda, at a YMCA camp. So I went there in 2000 and was looking through the list of classes, and there's about 100 classes, and there was one on Brazilian jazz. And I remember when I was 10 years old, and I was in the country of upstate New York, and heard, that was about 1966, when a lot of the Brazilian music was coming over to the United States during those Carnegie Hall concerts, and Jobim and Girl from Ipanema, and I didn't know what it was. But I was absolutely fixated on it. And that summer, one of the older women who was a great piano player taught me Girl from Ipanema. And I remember being, 10 years old and playing Mozart and Bach, and I just could not get over the harmonies of it. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever played. And then you flash forward to here I am in California in 2000, and I see this class in Brazilian jazz, and I take it, and it's an ensemble class. So there's vocalists and instrumentalists and keyboardists, and there's a huge room set up with all these instruments. And the teacher was Marcos Silva, who became my mentor, who is from Rio and is an extraordinary jazz pianist, composer, teacher, intense. And took this week-long class with him, and by the end of the week, I had decided that I had to play this music, that I had to become a student of this music. And up until that point, I'd been, kind of dabbling in everything. I mean, I'd been playing jazz, I'd been in a rock band, in a fusion band, in a wedding band, doing classical, and just kind of being a general piano player. And I had also I had taken a Cuban workshop with Chucho Valdez in Canada a few years before, so I'd really gotten into montunos and salsa music, but I knew that it was actually really hard on my fingers because it's really loud and hard, so I loved it. But when I took this Brazilian class, I felt like I'd found my second calling. So I dove into it and ended up joining a band a year later and studying with Marcos, driving down to Berkeley every Wednesday night for about 11 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Studying with him.
Wow.
And a few years into it, in 2003, so I'd only been 2 or 3 years, so I was a real beginner. We had to use up some of my husband's frequent flyer miles. So we went to Brazil. We went to Rio. And I had already at that point had listened to a ton of Brazilian music and had my favorites. And my favorite singer at that time was a singer named Leny Andrade, who is kind of like the Sarah Vaughan of Brazil. She also loves American jazz, so she does incredible Brazilian samba and bossa nova, but she loves to scat. And so that was not always the case with Brazilian singers. And I had a bunch of her CDs, and by being friends with Marcos and having gone to jazz camp and Brazil camp also, which is another camp, I'd had a few contacts, and they gave me some suggestions of where to go and who to hook up with. And so we get to Rio, and we get off the airplane, and I hear this amazing bossa nova music, and I think how wonderful they're piping in. It's not Muzak, it's wow. Here we are in Jobim International Airport, and I'm hearing a trio. And we turn the corner, and it's not piped in, it's live. Wow. So there's a live, and I just thought, welcome to Rio. So we stayed right in Ipanema, and we immediately were like, okay, let's go out and hear music. And my hope was, maybe I'll be able to sit in at a club or play my 1 or 2 songs. So we find a concert that Leny Andrade is doing, and it's right before Carnival preparation when the city gets crazy because everyone's preparing for Carnival. It was, a few weeks before all that gets started, so a lot of musicians are playing in little clubs. So she was playing just with her piano player in some club, and we went down to the club, and there were about 40 people in there. It was not, we were the only people that spoke English. There was a table of women from Argentina, and Leny, and I'm just blown away that I get to see her live because she's one of my heroes, and she starts singing, and she starts reciting poetry while her piano player is playing underneath her, and tears start running down our faces. I didn't know what she was saying, but it didn't matter. And she started singing all these songs that I had listened to, and most of the people in the room started singing along with her. And I'm watching and studying the piano player who plays just like my teacher Marcos, and I'm in love with this style of playing. And my husband leans over to me and says, after the show, we're going to go backstage and ask Leny if she'd like to record with you while we're here in Rio.
Oh, my God.
That's reasonable.
I looked at him and I said, shut the F up. I'm trying to enjoy myself.
Oh, my God.
And he, because I was just like nervous just being the audience. Yeah. And he said, well, you have 3 songs to decide. I'm doing it anyway. You can decide if you want to join me. And I knew he was going to.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to do it. So the rest of the concert, I was, my heart rate was up. But we go backstage, and there's the guy blocking the door, and nobody speaks English, really. So in our broken, he actually studied more Portuguese to get there than I did, says, we'd like to say hello to Leny. And he says, well, are you friends of hers? And we said, no. And he goes, okay, and opens the door. Now, which would never happen in the United States, right? You wouldn't even get to the door. So there's Leny, and I'm starstruck, and my David starts saying, this is my wife, and we mention Marcos because Marcos used to play with her in Rio. And we just locked eyes, and she said, well, I have an idea. Why don't I pick you up on Friday, and you come to my studio in Niterói, which is across the bay, and you try out the piano and see if you like it. Which was her way of saying, who the heck are you? And I need to hear you play, right? But she was being so generous about it, not saying, well, who are you? And,
Right.
Oh, that you think you can. So I think, well, if this is where it starts and ends, I'm good.
Absolutely.
So we go back to the hotel, and the next day we rent a keyboard. Because I thought, well, if this is going to happen, I said, David, you go down to Ipanema and watch the girls on the beach. You go watch the girls from Ipanema, and so we're ordering this piano in broken Portuguese.
Yeah.
Get the piano up to the hotel room. At that point, this is all before. This is 2003, so you had faxing. There wasn't, you couldn't email things and print them. So we get music faxed just in case. And she said, call me in a couple of days. We call her in a couple of days. She says, call me tomorrow. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Plus, we're only there for 10 days, and this is already day 5. We get her on the phone, and she says, I'm coming tomorrow at 3. I'll pick you up at the hotel. She shows up. We're sitting in the car, and she's giving us this tour of Rio. And we hop out, and I get a picture of she and I with the background of the mountain, and thinking, whatever. And she's putting in CDs of when she played with Sting and when she played with this person. And I can't believe it.
It's a dream.
I'm just thinking, oh my God, Leny Andrade is giving us a tour. And we're laughing and talking. We get to Fabio's up this little narrow street, and it's this tiny little studio. And she goes, okay, play. So I start to play the first song that I learned, which is called Rio, which is a song she made famous, that I was studying with in Berkeley. Yeah. So I start playing it, just the groove part. And she starts smiling, and she said, you don't play like an American, you play like a Brazilian. What should we record?
Oh my God.
And I was still a novice, but she could tell that I had the spirit. Yeah. So we put together, I had a limited repertoire, very limited repertoire. So I named some songs that I knew. And she calls up the composers, Ivan Lins and Edu Lobu, who, live, their best friend, and these are my heroes. And she's like, can I come by and pick up the CD so I can learn this song? And, oh, Ivan is out of town, but I can go pick up this and that, because she was going to learn my repertoire.
My goodness.
Nice.
Wow.
So we end up, and then she said, do you want bass and drums? Because it was just going to, and I said, sure. And so she calls up, she said, they play with Ivan Lins. They're very good.
Oh,
trust me. Right? I'm like,
yes, I got it.
So the next night they show up, and they spoke even less English. Sweetest guys, Edvelton Silva, the drummer, and what's his name? I'm blanking his name. It'll come to me. And the sweetest guys, but we didn't, it wasn't a fancy studio, and we were all in different rooms, and the only way to see each other was for me to stand up, because there was a mirror, but I really couldn't see the drummer at all, and we're all in separate rooms, and I'm trying to explain the chart, but it's all grunts and this and that.
Yeah.
But anyway, we started recording at midnight. Because the Brazilians take their time. You have to drink coffee for 4 hours. So we got there at 7. I was ready at 7:05. And David said, chill, we're in Rio. So Leny's regaling us with stories about her incredible life, living in Mexico, working with Bill Evans. I mean, just on. And I'm in the piano room practicing.
Of course.
Because I was just like a nervous wreck.
Yeah.
At midnight, she goes, okay, let's go. So we start at midnight, and it's about 3:30 in the morning. And we hadn't done Rio yet, and I really wanted to do Rio. And it was getting late. And I said, could we do Rio? And she said, sure. So we do Rio. And I felt, it was one of those things in life, I'm sure you've had similar things where you just don't have the time to get really nervous. And, if I'd had to think about this for weeks or months, I would have been just a lot less prepared in some ways.
Yeah,
I just had to go on pure here's who I am at this moment. Here's what I have at this moment. And I'm being held by these extraordinary genius talents, and we're holding each other. And they're making me sound great. And, you know, and I remember going out onto the deck of Fabio's, and it was, you know, just before dawn, and I could hear the monkeys and the sounds of the jungle, and just seeing the lights of Rio across the bay. And I was just, what is happening? Am I here with Leny Andrade? You know, and then we drive home. Lenny's driving us home, and as we get to Ipanema, you see the sun rising over the ocean. And I'm imagining the credits rolling down, the sun rising, and because it was just, you know, surreal.
Yeah.
And then David said, well, you can smell the bakeries and the baked bread everybody's starting to wake. And David said, you want to go to the beach? I said, I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
So he walked on the beach, and I just, you know, hit the bed and fell asleep. And the next night, we did a little touch-ups with her voice, and we were leaving the following day. I mean, this was like the last 2 days. And she said, I'm driving you to the airport. You know, and her manager, I asked her at one point, what made you decide to do this? She said, my manager said, you don't know this American girl, and, you know, and Leny in her accent said, I like her. I like her, and I like her hair. So she just, and then she said, whatever you want to do, you can do whatever you want with this CD. It's, you know, so we get back. Meanwhile, on the plane, there was this 3-hour layover, and we had the rough mix. So we're playing it for all these Brazilians on the plane, and everybody's hugging and kissing, and because everyone knows who Leny is.
Of course,
it was just a party on the plane.
My Lord.
I mean, it was just, you know, it was amazing. And when I got back to the United States, I finished the CD with Mary Fettig on flute and sax, who is the finest in the Bay Area. She played in Stan Kenton's orchestra when she was 19. She was the first female. And her son, Scott Thompson, who is Brazilian musician extraordinaire, and a guy named Phil Thompson, who lives up in Oregon now, who's an amazing drummer, and Randy Vincent on guitar, just a few other people. And we did the 6 other tracks. I had 4 with Leny, and then we added things to those tracks. And about another year or 2 later, Jessica Felix brought Leny here for us to headline at the Healdsburg Jazz Festival. And then we went down to L.A., and that's where I met Fabiana.
Oh, okay.
Winded our way back to, she came to the Jazz Bakery, and she had grown up in Brazil with Leny as the person she wanted to be when she grew up.
Wow.
So that's how we met.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Oh,
I know that was a long story.
That was a
I
killer
know.
story.
That was an entire movie.
Oh, my God. I know.
Taking us through the whole thing.
Exactly. Whoa.
You can't plan those things.
No.
Serras de Viludo, sorrio pro meu rio que sorri de tudo, que é dourado quase todo dia e alegre como a luz. Rio é mar, eterno se fazer amar. O meu rio é lua, amiga branca e nua. É sol, é sal, é sul, são mãos se descobrindo em canto azul. Por isso é que o meu rio da mulher beleza acaba num instante com qualquer tristeza. Meu rio que não nome porque não se cansa. Meu rio que balança, sorriu, 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 sorriu. Fala tu bana de doriri. Chama tu bata maniri. Fala tu varala de dorere. Chama tu doriri. Fala tu varala de dorere. seu mar, lindas flores que nascem morenas.
It's just
Whoa.
divinely orchestrated.
So
That is so
that
cool.
all started from flight points, mileage. Like the reason you went on that trip in the first place was just to use
My
some-
husband had years ago. He had worked for a corporation and had to fly a lot, and his miles were about to expire. So he had a lot of miles, and we had young kids at home, and we're never going to get away. So his mother, bless her heart, my mother-in-law, said, "Why don't I'll watch the kids so that you can go." Right, because that was the only way. I mean, my son was 5, and in kindergarten. So we originally were going to go to Paris or somewhere like that, because David said, "Well, there's a lot of Brazilian music there," and then we were like, "Why don't we go to Brazil?" Even though so we had enough to do it. So that's why we went there, and.
Well, yeah, actually, I tried to listen to that album, but it looks like it's not on Spotify or anything like that. So we need to purchase it, which is actually
I will
great.
give you, yes.
No, good for
it's
you.
on CD Baby.
I'm going to get, okay,
Yes.
so I'll order it from
And
there.
I need to get it on Spotify and all of that. And because I really want to. And it's stood the test of time. It's old for me now. And I plan to do another CD, but I can still listen to it and go, wow, it still holds up, even though, of course, I like to think I've gotten better in those years.
Yes, well, I can't wait to hear it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, I'm thinking about this trio that you have now with Fabiana. And it's so Fabiana on vocals and you're on piano, and then we've got Amy Molinari Hart on percussion.
Right. Well, the trio is no longer.
Oh, okay.
But it was for 3 years, and it was a blast. It was. We had a great time, and we also did an LA tour and went up to Oregon, and played in the jazz station in Eugene, which was really fun. But our lives were, we all had so much going on, and it's a lot to do a trio because you're really exposed. There was no bass, there was no trap set.
Yeah.
And Amy's a great percussionist, but it's very bare. And as a piano player and having to do the solos and having to cover the bass,
Oh, man.
it was very challenging. And so it was a very rehearsal-heavy need. So it was great while it lasted. And now I perform, Fabiana and I either perform together as a trio with Kendrick.
Nice.
So we have drums, piano, and voice, or with a band setting. And I've hired her to perform with my band at Healdsburg, and hopefully we'll do a show there this winter. And then she hires me. So we still perform together, but it's when we can.
Yes.
And I've also worked, I actually had a wonderful gig recently at the San Jose Jazz Festival with Masha Campagna, who is a wonderful singer of Brazilian music. And I've played with her. I met her 15 years ago, and we've done occasional gigs, but we've started to work together more. And she asked me to join at the San Jose Jazz Festival, and it was a marvelous gig. She plays a lot of really lesser-known, challenging, melodically and rhythmically songs, and I love doing that. Songs by Chico Pinheiro and just composers that are kind of cutting edge, along with Jobim and all the Ivan Lins and all the great composers.
So you get a set list,
Yes.
and then you have to really work on those pieces. And so I'd really like to hear about that process. Like,
The actual
The work.
shedding. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Shedding.
The work is the work, and it's a lot of work. Tend to be a perfectionist, and especially when I'm playing in a specific genre, I'm going for as authentic a sound as I can. I really want to emulate those notes, those chords, those riffs, that feel. And so I do a lot of listening. So for instance, that was a challenging gig because I didn't have much time to prepare, and there were songs I had never played before, and they were really involved.
how much time did you have to prepare?
less than a week.
Oh my God.
And they were hard songs. And not only were they hard, they all had riffs that needed to be filled in, and they were harmonically challenging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were just, and that's how Chico Pinheiro's songs are. That's how Ginga's songs are. They're beautiful. And once you kind of learn it, it all fits together. But it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so I listen to the songs a few thousand times, and I read along, and I try to just get the groove. You know, I try to get tempo-wise, you know, what are the changes? And a lot of times, too, when you're listening to a recording, there's more musicians on the song.
Yeah.
There might be an extra guitar player or a horn player, and that we're not going to have at the gig. And in this gig, it was just piano, bass, drums, and voice.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a guitar player.
Yeah.
There wasn't a guitar player. There wasn't a horn player. So you have to pick and
All the
choose
fills and-
What you're gonna do.
what's your lane. And so it usually takes me a couple of hours just to kind of get inside the tune. And what I mean by that is where I'm not kind of struggling with just getting through the tune, but where I feel like I understand the tune. I understand the architecture of the tune. I kind of get melodically what the tune is about. I kind of get how the harmonies move through the tune. I would liken it to architecture, like looking at the bones of the thing. Like what was the bare minimum structure, and then they added the walls and the floor and the windows.
Yeah.
And I look at analyzing music that way, that a great piece of music has an architecture.
Yes.
Never thought of it that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's it can be very different depending on the type, the genre. But I feel like I've gotten a lot of that knowledge from being a classical musician, and I got a degree in classical piano performance, and I love music theory and almost became a music theory major. So I got to understand how to analyze the classical composers, and that increased my enjoyment tenfold. And that there was more than one way to look at it. You've got all these different theorists, just like with math, I would imagine, arriving at the same conclusion with different
ways,
formulas.
yes. Yeah.
Same thing with music. And so I always liked, I learned about form. I learned about harmonic structure, harmonic rhythm, which is how fast the harmonies change, is called the harmonic rhythm, which is different than the rhythm, like how fast, what's the meter of the song?
Yeah.
It's like how fast do the harmonies change? Is it slow? Does it change? And then, of course, the structure of the melody. What is the main melody? How is the melody varied? Is there more than one melody? And then, of course, analyzing the harmony itself. Yeah. Does it stay in the key? Does it play around with other key centers? Then, of course, the dynamics, and how are you going to interpret when you repeat the melody? You know, there's just, so there's many layers to that. And I always like to get to that place, but I can't get to that place until I understand the song.
Yeah.
So for me, it's, and then I can't feel free to improvise until I have my footing. Yeah. Sometimes I don't have the chance to get there, and I just have to kind of wing it. And that's the nature of being a pianist for hire. You know, someone calls you, hey, my piano player can no longer do the gig. It's on Saturday. Can you do this? And, you know, please send me a set list, and can I throw in a few of mine? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the more you play in a genre, the more it's less daunting. But this was a set list that was challenging. And I knew I was playing with an extraordinary rhythm section. And I was. And they'd also played with her before. So I was kind of the new
right.
kid on the block. So I basically told everybody that other than working and eating and sleeping, I'm in the studio doing, 10-hour days, shedding, and I know how to do that. But it's not always my favorite way of working. But fortunately, I know how to do that because I've been doing that my whole life. And in classical music school, boy, you had to play things perfectly, and you got judged by juries, they actually called them. It was pretty miserable. So I kind of self-imposed that on myself, but I also really want to sound good. So it's an adrenaline rush too, you know, when you have a deadline.
Yeah.
That kind of is what gets me to really focus. And I know how to do it, but I'm also miserable. You know, I'm also like, I have 3 more songs I haven't touched, and it's 2 a.m. You know.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's part of the process. Does that ask me more if you?
That is great. I love hearing that. One just basic, super simple question is: did you have to learn those all by ear, or did you have charts?
Oh, that's a great question. I could not have learned those by ear at that time. I did have charts.
I was gonna faint if you said that you did, but
No.
But here's the thing: charts are an art, not a science. And depending on who's writing the chart and how well the chart's written, it can be challenging. Now, I had pretty good charts. I would say overall I had really good charts, but they weren't, I had to modify.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question about charts? I just read a whole thing that Anton Schwartz posted actually on Facebook. It was like a thing about how to make a good chart. Okay, so I'm just curious as to what you think makes a good chart. I mean, talking about spacing with the measures, things that make it more easy, you know, just a little easier to read. So do you want to say
absolutely.
the qualities of a good chart?
So it's funny that you mention this because I one summer was asked to teach a class at Jazz Camp West. This was such a thrill after so many years of being a student there. Then I was an accompanist to Maria Marquez in her South American class and to Sandy Cressman. And then one year I was asked to be an accompanist, but also to teach a class. Well, Jazz Camp West has all these phenomenal world-class piano players teaching and anything you would want to know. So I was like, what am I going to teach? So I decided it was great. Madeline Eastman, who was the musical director at the time and is an amazing vocalist, I proposed something to her I called Crossing the Bridge from Classical to Jazz. Of course, it has the pun of bridge, the bridge of a song, but also, because that's my story.
Yeah.
Right.
So I thought, well, I can teach how did I cross the bridge?
Yeah.
I didn't go to school for it. I went to classical school. Nobody really taught me. And it wasn't an easy road. I mean, I could have learned some things faster and better. But one of the things and I had 6 days to teach this class. So I had a little topic for each day. And one day was chart reading. And I printed up a bunch of good charts, bad charts, mediocre charts. And I thought we'd spend a day on it. We ended up spending 3 full days on it, and we could have spent more on what makes a good chart. So it's funny that you asked me that. And I really enjoyed it because no one had ever really, musicians, we all complain to each other about charts all the time.
Right.
And there's so many I still handwrite charts, even though I have the software. I just, I need to do that more. But there's all these different softwares. So rule number 1, you want to make it easy to read, right? Legible. And as less, as less crowded, as least crowded as possible. So you definitely want to have your measures lined up. So typically it's 4 measures to a line, right? And you start by, right?
Yeah.
Obvious, right? I have a million charts where there's 3 measures on one line and 5 on the next. And I've gotten so used to them, but then I give them to people and they're complaining to me, and I think I really should rewrite that chart, but I've been using it for 15 years.
Yeah, of course.
Get over it. As somebody said on the news the other day, which we... So you want to have it even and consistent. Notation, is it a chart where you're going to have the melody written out note-wise, or is it just a chord chart? I hate chord charts. Hate them. Because I don't think it's a chart. It's a harmony chart, but it's not a chart. I want to see the melody. I want to, even if I'm never playing the melody, I want to see the melody.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have the time to do that. But I get so many charts of songs that I really don't know that are just the chords. And it's really miserable. And also the chords may be very generic, and I'm usually going to want to fancy them up, add what they call extensions, 9s and 7 and 9s and 11s and flat, sharp 9s, all of that, and it'll just say G7. So I don't know what kind of G7. Well, if I don't know the melody, I don't know what kind of alteration for that chord. I don't know if I can do a flat 9 there. What if the melody has a regular 9? can't do a sharp 11 if there's a 5, you know.
Right.
Right.
So all of that is very unhelpful. And so then I end up, if that's the chart I was given, I have to do it by ear. I have to listen to the song and go, ooh, oh, they put another chord before that. What is that chord? And that's very time consuming.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I'm not super fast at it unless I'm in the groove of doing it. I can now recognize sharp 9 chords and things like it. But there's still some chords that I'm like, oh, it's either a this or a that. And so back to your question of what makes a good chart, as accurate as you want it to be played. So if you want a G sharp 11 major 7, it's nice to write G sharp 11
Right,
major
sure.
7 rather than G or G major 7, you know. But there are different ways to write G sharp major 7 sharp 11. Sometimes it's written as the flat 5, because the sharp 11 is also a flat 5. So they might say flat 5 major 7. That drives me crazy because I register sharp 11.
Yeah.
And that's because
on a major chord.
in a major chord, because also that's how the Brazilians tend to write it. So I've been reading those charts for X many years. That's the way I notate it.
Right.
Or people, you know how you can write a major 7th with a triangle or a capital M? I hate the M's.
The M's are the worst, yeah.
The worst.
I don't like the M's either.
No one
M's are
does.
horrible.
The triangle is good.
Triangle, it's major 7th,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or you'll have a chart that has both. You know, or even if it says maj 7, that's better than just M. But I
is, yeah.
still hate it because it's too much information.
Yeah.
So I'm really into efficiency. How, and I also have a tough time. And this is just peculiar to me. There are some chords that I can more easily read as flat chords than sharp chords.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even if I'm in a sharp key,
Yeah. I'm the same.
and let's say I'm in E flat, and there's a let's say I'm in E major, and there's a G sharp chord. It's easier for me to read it as A flat,
right.
and it's just me. So I will write that for myself, but then I'm giving it out to someone else, and I have to say to them, "I know we're in E major." But, you know, when I see G sharp, it just throws me, you know, and hopefully they're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're like, well, that's really screwed up, you know.
So you remember to say that to them.
I
Boy.
hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to. I try
yeah.
to. You know, I get plenty of musicians complaining to be on my charts, and they're all justified, and I try to keep up with it.
Okay, but what about like if you have if you've written out all your 4 measure lines,
Yes.
but you have you know, a melody that has a lot of 8th notes or some 16th notes in there, and so you can only fit 2 measures, then you know, I mean, then do you
That's a really good
happens.
question. I've generally been able to fit 4 measures in.
Okay. I have not. I'm
You have
guilty
not?
of the
Okay, well,
like 3 measure, and you know.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, but I would, whenever I write charts, I write equal measures, unless it's the last line,
Yeah.
and it's 3
Gotta follow
measures.
the phrase, basically.
Exactly, but just because it's easier, even if you're working with people, to say, you know, and I try to put measures in if
Yeah.
it's a really long chart. It's easier to say measure 8. People know that's
Right.
2 lines down,
Yeah.
rather than having to count.
I number them all. I
Oh,
number
that-
all on all the
On each line.
On each line.
That's
yeah.
fantastic. So it's easier to do that in 4s,
Yeah.
right? Because you can go to measure 20 something or other. Now, I have to say, I have a lot of charts that are not that way, and I've gotten used to them.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like rewriting them. But if I'm writing a chart,
Yeah.
so if you have a lot of 8ths or 16th notes, that's tough.
You squish them all in there, and then it's
Maybe
like,
maybe you're
like-
in the wrong meter. Maybe you should be in 8th. Maybe it should be 4/8 or instead of 4/4. So that I
I mean,
don't know.
they're just classic standards, you know.
Oh.
But
And you're
anyway.
finding it hard to put form.
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
That's I would love to.
I can't
you know,
think of like right now, but I have examples then in my book. That,
Yeah.
of that, you know. But anyway, I ended up getting one of those big iPads, you know, so that I could actually erase things very easily. I actually do it by hand on an iPad.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah, and I can print them out, and I can actually make different colors for different lyrics. It's kind of cool. But when I was just doing it with a pencil, there's a lot of erasing, and sometimes you know how that goes. You're just
It's terrible,
It's
right?
like a black mark.
It's a black,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And I'm not proud to say it, but
Oh
I
my
still
God.
do most of my charts by hand. And again, it's been on the list for years. Okay, I really need to. But I have, which software is that everybody loves, but
Finale?
it's really, no, not Finale, the other one.
Sibelius.
Sibelius. But I hear it's really hard to really
learn.
get good at.
Yeah.
And do you think it is?
No.
Not for an old
Maybe
person.
you could give me a tutorial on that too, because I wouldn't mind being able to
Because
do that.
I
Yeah.
would really, I have it, and I would love to use it,
Sure.
but and I really would love to use it because those charts I love.
Yeah, I agree.
They're the nicest looking. Finale, are okay, but I really like Sibelius. It's just that
Yeah. No. I used Sibelius one time for a big band project, and the one thing I couldn't figure out is actually the playhead. The playhead was the worst part of Sibelius for me. Was trying to get it to move around in the right way. I had to drag it. I couldn't figure out a way to bring it back to the beginning or back to
Right.
certain spots.
And those are the frustrating moments when you're working with a software program. You're like, God damn it, this is taking me 2 freaking hours.
I could have just written it out.
Yeah.
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
and that's kind of what I end up doing. And there's something, it's kind of old school. It's because I went to music school before there were computer software programs and all that. We did all our theory, and I wrote scores all by hand. And I'm not saying that I love it, but it kind of gets in your brain in a certain way. Not that it doesn't with the software, but I
Right.
think it's kind of like a habit. It's how I learned to do it.
Yeah.
And there's something satisfying about writing a nice chart by hand.
Yeah.
You're probably in the chart a little bit more. It's like when you write something for like notes, it's been shown that that's probably better for the brain to like
good.
physically write things.
Yeah, I know when when I used to listen to lectures, it always helped me to take notes, even though I might not look at the notes, but it somehow goes in the head better.
Right,
And
it saves it
Bennett,
better.
yeah, we took, or actually, I'm not sure. Did you take the theory with Bennett or not? No. Oh, so at the JC, because I went back to school
the
like
JC
6 years
so
ago.
wonderful.
Yeah. And so I took Bennett's Friedman's jazz theory class, and so he had us writing out an entire score. I think it was like 3 horns, piano, bass, and drums,
Yeah,
and parts,
by
and
hand,
we
writing
had to do it by hand. We were required to do it by hand. It took me pretty much like 2 full 8-hour days.
Yes,
I believe it.
It takes a while.
I totally
I had
believe it,
neck
and
aches.
it's incredibly time consuming, and that's probably why I don't write as many or fix as many charts.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, I'll just break down but I'm usually, if I'm rewriting, at least I'm starting from not having to figure out the chords. I'm just
Right.
reformatting it, and that's much easier.
Yeah.
But it's just laborious, and I think a lot of people don't realize how long it takes and how much we have to practice.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And
Hello.
It's
It's not a 2-hour gig, a 3-hour gig. I mean, it's like there's so much more that goes into it. This is kind of a little bit of a theme. With the podcast here with musicians.
It's and I was talking to one of my best friends who's a singer who she's a music therapist as well, and we were a duo back in Ann Arbor, the Ozermore duo, and we were joking about how you go to parties and you tell people, you're a musician and blah, 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 and they're just, oh, how lucky, I wish I had, and you just, it's really lovely to be acknowledged, and it's nice to hear that, but it's also, I always find myself saying, so do I even want to bother talking about what it's really like to be a musician or the other half of being a musician or the other 3/4 of, or do I just want to time myself for how long do I have to really listen to this before I change the subject, because it starts to hurt after a while. It just starts to feel like I want to acknowledge it and take it in and be appreciative, but I don't know if I have the energy or the desire to bring up what the profession, what being a professional
really
music
is,
really
yeah.
is, and so it's I wouldn't change it for anything, but there are some decisions I would have made differently, and I mean, I think everybody in their professional life perhaps has those realizations or reckonings, but it's,
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Imagine that follows suit for most artists of different things, like directors or physical artists, painters, graphic designers, anyone. Because we always see the finished product,
Right.
and that's kind of it. As a consumer, you don't always think about the what it took to get to that.
Well,
product.
exactly. And I mean, something that's really been just in the last 5 or 6 years for me, and I've been at this for decades, is that when I was little, and because I used to, I've been in theater, and I was in a social change feminist theater company for many years where I acted and wrote and did music.
God.
And it was like kind of a dream come true because I always wanted to be that kind of artist, and did that for so many years. And it was really where I got to direct people and rehearse people and jump on and off the stage and compose music. When I was little, I think I held out that what being successful I was going to be rich and famous. And not so much the rich, well, sure, I would have lots of money so I could really help change the world. I mean, it was always with this consciousness that I wanted to bring love and light to the world.
Right.
And that I'd have the platform to do it if that was what happened to me. And I used to, when I was a kid and I'd watch all the talk shows, I used to pretend I was on the talk shows. I mean, I was always a performer. And then as I went through my life and things happen, kids and marriages and divorces and all that stuff, it looked less and less likely that I was going to, go to Hollywood and be that person. But I've always found really interesting ways to perform. I mean, the story that you heard about Leny, I wouldn't, that's incredible. A lot of people will never have that kind of magical thing. And things with the theater company that I did, it was called Common Ground Theater Company. We toured the country and did amazing, it felt like really powerful work. Yeah. And, raising my kids and teaching piano. I've, met so many amazing students. And now I have 2 additional jobs. I'm the music director of both a synagogue and a church that share the same space, share the same building. And I kind of fell into being the choir directors of both of these choirs. Now, I'd never been a choir director before, but I've been a band director. I've run lots of bands. I've been a teacher, a music teacher privately my whole career. But a church choir, no. And, a synagogue choir, no. But I've been at those jobs for 3 years now. And of course, I've learned on the job and realized I had all these skills for it. A couple I didn't have, but, and it's a very progressive Christian church. So I love everything about it. And we're members of the synagogue, and I love that community. So I'm very lucky. It's the type of religious institutions that I can align with. And I'm just so happy doing it. And it's not something I ever would have imagined I'd be doing at this point in my life or ever, and feeling really nourished and really like I am changing the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm using my theater skills. I'm getting people to perform better. I'm getting people to sing solos, present. I mean, I'm just kind of being myself, winging it, but also, going to some workshops of real master teachers of choir stuff. But I'll always just be me doing it. And of course, I'm at the piano directing. I'm not in front directing. So, that's different. And then my piano students, I teach mostly adults. And I'm just in heaven because I have to use a different method with each person. I get adult beginners. I get people who've played their whole lives and want to undo some bad habits. I get people that have said, I don't even know where C is on the piano, but it's been my lifelong love and I'm retired. And then I say, well, what's your goal? What do you want to do? Rather than, well, how would I teach a 7-year-old? We're adults. We have limited time. And so it's like, if you could dream up what you want to do. And one person's like, I want to play for Elise. And this person is a ways off from doing that. But we're learning all the basics, and I'm teaching him by rote some measures of for Elise, even though it's way out of where he's ready for.
Yeah.
Because if he just has a couple of measures of it, he's going to feel successful.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm learning how to, and one said, well, I want to be able to play Christmas carols for my family. And I don't know a thing about piano. So it's like, okay, we're going to get 3 carols, as a minimum.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we're going to do it.
Yeah. Right.
I love
we'll
it.
do it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it forces me to be creative,
Yeah,
like getting
totally.
inside the head of this person.
Right.
Should I work more on their technique? Should I work more on this? How do they learn best? Should I teach the notes? Should I teach it by rote? I always work on posture and all that because my piano teachers never did. And I was in pain when I graduated from college because I'd been hunched over. They never told me, they never helped me with how to not get all the injuries that I got. So I'm really careful about that.
Yes.
So it's really, and I still perform and I still do concerts, but I'm not going to grab every gig anymore because I'm too old for that.
Wow. Boy, that's a lot. I just have to take a moment because I'm like tearing up. Just listen, I'm noticing myself tearing up because I'm just so moved by your story. And there's a lot to digest.
And I talk fast.
I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so glad you came over here.
I'm delighted. It's so lovely to be asked these questions.
So, I have lots more.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So let's see. You just mentioned that you don't take every gig. So what kind of gigs do you like to take? What makes you want to take a gig?
Well, I love taking gigs where there's a piano there.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
But I don't always. I mean, if it's a venue that I like, I have a wonderful keyboard. But
Are you able to get it into the car and all that by yourself and out? And
I finally have a keyboard that is not too heavy. When I started playing, I was schlepping a Rhodes around. And this was back in Michigan in blizzards and snow. And back then, of course, I didn't want to let anybody know that, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, right.
Now I'm like, someone offers to help. I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank
totally.
you so much. What a gentleman or gentlewoman you are. No, I have a keyboard. It's still a schlep, though. And there is a saying, I'm sure other musicians have said it to you, is they pay you to schlep and you play for free.
Right.
So that's one thing. If there's a tuned piano, I'm always more interested. Venue is important, I'm happy to do club gigs if it's a real there's a listening element to it, or the club is kind of known to have live music where people like it. I've played everywhere. I've played at dive bars. It's really fun. The number of the type of venues I've played at. I love playing concerts. And I love playing at Piedmont Piano in Oakland because you get to play their Italian Fazioli handmade piano where it's butter. You touch it and the sound echoes for miles. That's always really fun to play on a fine instrument. I love doing private events when someone's got a piano in their home. I really like playing funerals. And that may sound a little morbid, but what I like about playing funerals is how present everyone is. There's something about if the music can be comforting and be part of the healing for the grieving people, I feel really like I've contributed something of value. And I really want to contribute something of value. But if I'm commanding someone's attention to pay attention to me, I want to have something to say. And so that's what I always think, whether I'm playing for a funeral or a wedding or a crowded bar, I want to think if there's one person out there listening, I'm speaking to them. And if there's nobody listening, then I'm playing for my soul. Of course, it's more pleasant to play when, and I have to say money is a factor. As I've now, it's not a factor if it's with someone I really want to play with, and it's a venue I really want. So everything's negotiable.
Right.
But I, so it's always a combination of things. I really prefer to play indoor gigs than outdoor gigs, although I have played wonderful outdoor gigs if it's mic'd well, if it's shaded. And I've played on festival stages that have been absolutely marvelous. I played at the Vancouver Folk Festival years ago and the National Women's Music Festival. And it's something, and I played at Gay Pride in the 80s with a rock band called Rumors of the Big Wave and in front of Moscone Center. So there really isn't, one venue. I don't like playing, outdoors in the sun when nobody, But I really, it's nice to be able to, like when we played at the San Jose Jazz Festival, for instance, we were playing inside the Fairmont Hotel. And we walked in and the sound guys were just wonderful and the piano had just been tuned. And, it was just like, hey, how you doing? Tell me what, it's such a lovely thing to have that. And I mean, that's one of the perks you get when you're more well-known. And like at the Healdsburg Hotel, I'm so familiar with the venue that, I might be tired when I get there, but I know that how I'm going to feel in an hour when I've been playing.
Yeah.
So...
my husband... you're one of his absolute favorite people to listen to. And one of the things, I was, he was so excited when I told him that you were coming.
Sweet.
Yeah. And so we kind of talked about you this morning a little bit. And he's like, she is just the piano boss. There's nothing that I love. He calls you the piano boss because and when you're at Hotel Healdsburg and Peter Barchet is there and Kendrick and and of course I've watched this too, but you just totally take charge. You're such a leader. And the way that you communicate with the musicians, I mean, they are just looking at you like every second, taking the cues. And I'm pretty amazed at your leadership skills, actually.
Thank you so
as a trio.
much.
And I'd like to hear about it.
Oh, well, that's really, it's been a learning process. Thank you for noticing that. And I have to say, playing with Peter and Kendrick is a dream trio. And the other thing that's great about it is that we've been playing together now for quite a few years.
Okay.
And there's nothing like that. Yeah. There are, so just in terms of how I love when it's the three of us, part of it is that we know each other.
Yeah.
And we've played these tunes a lot. And so we all have our, musical habits and our musical idiosyncrasies. And so it's like, okay, I know he's getting ready to finish his solo up, or no, I'm just going to hang back some more, or no, he wants me to jump in. We know those musical things because everyone has their personal idiosyncrasies. So that's one thing. When I started playing, well, really from the beginning, but when I started playing with other people, I was kind of acutely aware of the differences with guys and girls and, the sexism and and that I felt I had to be really great, really good to get the respect and all that. And it's just simply true. Now, that's not true with everybody, but pretty much 5 minutes into playing with somebody, you can kind of tell, is this someone who's with me or ignoring me or into their own trip, or it just simply won't communicate with me. And I've had years of doing that kind of thing. Gosh. And I'm done with, I say I'm done with it, and then I find myself in a situation where I'm, maybe playing with someone I have to play with that night that I don't know. And it's like, oh, I remember this. But I think, hey, that's all right. And I've had to learn how to get a tougher skin. I haven't always had a tough skin. I am naturally kind of a leader and naturally like to be in charge. Yeah. But I'm also a really good collaborator. So I know how to do both. And I have also been raised a woman in this society. And have had more than my fair share of experiences where I'll give a musical idea in a rehearsal and it'll get ignored, and then someone else, a guy, will say it and they'll go, "Oh my God, what a great idea. Let's do the intro that way." And I have to just, roll with it. And that's happened to me so many times. But then I've had to look at what can I change in myself? Not that it's my fault, but how, what do I have to develop so I'm not going to at least do my best so that doesn't happen again? And I actually, a few years ago, I had a talk with Peter Barchet, because I always ask him for feedback, and he's pretty straightforward. And he said, and also sometimes I can overcompensate and feel like I'm being too bossy, right? So, trying to find that. So he said, well, you should take over more in the trio. You just know, you need to tell us what to do. And it surprised me to hear that, because I thought I was. And I said, really? I said, he said, yeah, just say it out loud. No, but say no, next, go to the top, we're doing trades. Do it. And I'm so glad he was honest enough to tell me that he thought I wasn't doing that enough. So I started doing it more and realizing I'd rather someone say, "I got it, don't tell me," than "I didn't know because you weren't cueing me." Right. And that you're going to piss each other off. Musicians will. They just will. And you'll make mistakes. I'll lose my place in the thing. And to just not try to not let someone, giving me the evil eye derail me.
Yeah.
And I've used humor more. And even when someone maybe has noticed my mistakes, if they may make a mistake in a song, I might say to them during the break, "Well, it's so good to know I'm not the only person screwing up."
Yeah.
Just just to kind of say, "Hey, we're human." And even I'm kind of dishing it back a little, but it's like, and it also helps me gain my equilibrium.
Yeah.
That it's okay if I, of course nobody wants to make a mistake or lose the form, but I have the beauty of being a musician is you never stop learning. And you never stop improving. And if you think that you have reached that point, you're not the kind of musician I want to be around. People have asked me, do you like working with men versus women? And I say no. I like working with people I like working with. There is differences. We women tend to be more, we explain things more, and we want to make sure we haven't hurt anyone's feelings. But sometimes that's not always good. Sometimes you want someone just going, "Hey, could you just play it this way?" Guys won't necessarily get their feelings hurt. But this is very generalization.
Right. Sometimes I can feel it. Sometimes though, because I've been in some situations too, some combos and things, and sometimes it feels like if I'm that direct, because I can be that way, that it just feels sometimes kind of weird, because, oh God, now I'm saying this in front of everybody. But that, I'm this woman telling them what to do. And, it's kind of sometimes I just notice that they feel weird. I've been, I wasn't.
Is this when you've been the band leader?
We're in a combo at school, in a school.
Oh, okay.
And so, it isn't clear who's the leader. Right. I have been a natural leader in my life as a workshop leader, a yoga teacher for, nearly 30 years. I was doing that. And so it's a natural, I think, even though I'm a kind of a quiet person, it's really natural for me to take that leadership position. But I'm in a room full of guys, and on top of it, I'm older. And, so it was tricky.
It is tricky. And that's why I really prefer when I'm the leader, when it's my trio, because then there's no ambiguity.
Yeah.
But I'm also still very collaborative. And, so especially when I'm working with anybody, but especially musicians who might be more experienced in one aspect or one genre of the music, I do ask for opinions. But then I usually say, but it's my call. When it's more a collaborative thing, it's harder. And I agree with you. I find that for whatever reason, it's not as easy. Some guys are great about it, but it's not as easy.
Yeah.
And I've been playing enough over these last decades of being here to know which of the musicians I feel like I can communicate musically with more. But sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes someone who's not been very receptive, somehow they gain a new respect for me, or they're in a different mood and they listen. And sometimes someone who's been great can kind of surprise me with being dismissive and it's...
Dismissive is really the word. This is, that's...
It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's the worst.
And I've been in situations, even outside of school, in that situation where, there's really a leader, but he's saying that he's not a leader, for example. But he's, So anyway, I don't want to get into it because I just don't. But let's just say dismissive is a good word.
It's I think, like anything, like playing music is the easy. I always say that's the easier part, and it's not easy, right? It's all the personal dynamics, keeping a band together, being the band leader, doing gigs. And that's one of the reasons I've loved my trio at the hotel, because we have a routine. I send them the set list. I create the books. I say, and then once we've been doing that for years, it's like, hey, do you want to take another solo? I don't feel like soloing on this one tonight. We can, but the truth is, I don't always like being the leader. And sometimes it's nice to just be the hired hand. Yeah. But with that comes feeling less in control and less like I can say anything, and sometimes being not welcomed in a certain way.
Right.
And at those points, I just realize I've been developing a new attitude of, I'm doing this for me.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you know that that's the situation, that you are just that hired piano player, which I've also been in that situation, knowing that that's just what I am. Yeah. And when it's easy to surrender to that as well.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, give me the set list. I'll tell you which ones I want to solo on unless you really want me, No, I love that. I really love that, especially when the band leader has it together.
Yeah. So it's the clarity maybe of like knowing, is there a leader? Who's the leader?
Absolutely.
And just...
I've been a part. I was for a while back in Michigan. Was part of a group. It was a women's big band group called Lady Be Good, and I can't remember if I was the music director or if it was kind of collective. But those are tricky when it's sort of collective. Yeah. And in the theater company I was in, it was sort of collective, even though we had a director. And it was after years and years of doing that I said, I either want to be the boss or I want to be the hired hand.
Yeah.
Because I really do like putting a band together, but it's so much work being the band leader. It's so
Getting
much
those
work.
charts together.
The charts, but booking and dealing with rehearsal. I mean, it's a lot of work. So there's trade-offs. But I do think you just have to find the people that you feel are with you, that you're making something bigger than yourself, and it's not about showing off your chops. And it's not always easy to find that, because, and I always say, I think in general musicians are insecure because we're all wanting to sound the way we want to sound, and we're rarely there.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Totally. So we're a mess. No one
people. Yeah.
We're a mess, and we're also really sensitive.
Yeah. Exclamation.
Yeah.
So true. I know that you have a daughter who is a musician, and I would love to hear a little bit about her.
Well, my daughter is 29, and she has autism. And early on, she's my first. I have two children, and she, one of the things I noticed from the beginning was that she didn't have eye contact. And that's one of the signs that you look for. So when I talked to her, her eyes would wander all around, but I would start to sing to her. And when I sang to her, we would lock eyes. And she would really look at me. So I just began to sing to her all the time and telling her what I was doing, now we're going to eat. And being, it was easy for me to take nursery rhymes and make up words. And I didn't even think about it. I just did it because I wanted to connect with her. And I used to teach piano at home when she was a baby, and she would sit at the lessons because she didn't crawl right away, but she was loved being at the piano lessons. She would kind of sing along, and she was too docile. She wasn't interested in things in the material world, but she was interested in the oral world. And I just connected with her that way. I mean, that was my way in. And when she got a little older, I was playing something on the piano, and she toddled down the stairs and said, "Why did you play the low D at the end of that song?" And I had not told her anything about the piano or the notes or anything. And I said, "What?" And it was, in fact, the low D. And what I had done was I had transposed that song from the key that I had played it on a CD that she'd heard in utero. It was with a singer-songwriter, folk singer that I worked with all the time. And it was, she wrote all the songs and I did piano. It was really beautiful stuff. And she knew it was in D minor and not A minor, which was the key it was. Yeah. And I was absolutely floored. So I started bringing her over to the piano more and, just kind of playing. And I think at one point, either my husband or I asked her, said something like, "Can you sing middle C?" And then she she sang a note, and we went over to the piano, and it was like about a semitone sharp. We thought, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" And a week later, we were getting the piano tuned, and the tuner said, "Your piano is just a little flat." So she was singing the true middle C. Yeah. And so that was kind of amazing. Yeah, wow. Okay. But she exhibited a number of kind of extraordinarily tuned in on a sensory level, psychic level, however one wants to describe it, way. And I knew that I had, just a long journey that this was a really incredible child who really struggled to kind of understand this world and be in this world. And so right today, she sings in our community chorale, and she plays the flute and piccolo, and plays with the Sonoma Hometown Band, which is our local band that plays at 4th of July and Memorial Day weekend and does concerts, and it's a non-audition choir, and she's, it's kind of an oddball bunch of people, and she fits right in. And actually last year, the conductor of that band, who's just a wonderful man, he's so great, he heard me play Brazilian music, so he composed a piece for me, a piano concerto to play with the hometown band based on Brazilian rhythms. Cool. I went over and showed him, Bayonne, a couple of things. And so I got to perform with my daughter and her band a year ago in December, this piece that he wrote. And I hadn't played with an orchestra or a band since, probably since high school. So it was such a thrill. We did a performance in Sonoma and a performance at the Napa Valley Community College. They have a beautiful auditorium there. And so that was just a little thing that reminded me. But so now music is her, she calls it her mandatory activities. And she takes flute lessons once a week. But thank God, I mean, that's all I can say is that we had that to share, because all through school she was in the choirs and the bands. And of course, those teachers were always very hip to who she was and how smart she was and how this was so right for her. But it's been a really long journey. Yeah. And, ask me whatever you want. I mean, I could talk about her for hours and hours. So,
so I know that you have a son. How do they relate to each other?
So they're 7.5 years apart. my daughter is older. And when, this was so sweet. My daughter just blows me away all the time. When I was very pregnant, she asked me one day, because we knew it was a boy, she said, "Is he going to have my style?" And what she meant was, is he going to be autistic? And I just loved that she came up with that word.
Style, yeah.
It was so poetic and creative, and she's that way. She loves, she's very orally gifted, so she loves vocabulary and words, and I'm a real wordy vocabulary person, so I love to explain things to her, and then she incorporates it. And I said, "I don't think so. I don't know." And so then he was born, and immediately, he's this Mr. Social butterfly, and he wanted to play with her. And when they were very, very, very little, there was ways they played together, but by the time he was 3 or 4 even, he was kind of surpassing her in kind of social communication, even though she was very verbal and went to school and reads and all that, and he came up to us one day when he was probably no older than 4, and he said, "Why won't my sister play with me?" And so we explained to him, why. And then not that long later, he was a pretty early reader. We had a Time magazine issue that was all about autism, and he grabbed it, and it was laying on the living room floor reading about autism. And I didn't even know he could really was capable of reading that level yet. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I want to understand my sister better." So that was really something, and we got to kind of cry together about the difficulties that he had friends who had siblings that weren't autistic, and he wanted that. So we just let him have his feelings, and we had feelings, and then he's a math guy, and my daughter has a number system where she orders her entire world around numbers between 1 and 7. And she has colors that go with the numbers. They're the colors of the rainbow, and days of week, and cities, and car brands, and everything. And people, you're a number 3 woman, and I'm an anytime woman. And colors that, so... Yeah. It was more elaborate before she could explain it to us. Yeah. But of course, my son's really into math and stuff. So there was a point when he was quite a bit older where he would talk to her about her number system. And he knew what questions to ask her. And they started to connect more about her interests. Because autistic people often have very obsessive interests. And she's really into cars and roller coasters and birds and car alarms and weather and astronomy and really cool.
Yeah,
and medical conditions. We got her Grey's Anatomy one year. Nice. So she really studies these topics. Yeah. But you won't necessarily know because she won't necessarily share it with you because she doesn't think to share it. But then you get in a conversation with her about something and she's a wealth of knowledge. So we try to work with how to use what she knows. And she's she's extraordinary, but it's been a real long and winding road. So now that my son is in his last year of college, and he got to college, and you know how you're with your college friends and you share about your families, and he's told to all his friends all about his sister and how proud he is. And before he went away to college, he took a picture of her closet, and she organizes all her clothes in colors. So they're green, yellow, red, or whatever. And he had never seen her closet before, so he took a picture and put it on his Instagram. Nice. And he was like, "I'm so proud of my sister." And the New York Times came and wrote an article about the home she lives in because it's a new model of adult housing, and they interviewed Maris and I, and it was on the front page of the home section. So he showed his college friends that, and they were really proud. And when he brings his college friends home now, I can see that he shifted, even though he's 7 years younger than her. Sure. He's sort of gotten it that he's going to be her elder. Yes. And so one visit he came home, and I said, "Why don't you guys go take a walk?" So they went out by themselves and just talked. Because my son has been shy with her, or he just, but it's changing, and I'm cool. So it's just evolving. But there was a long period of time where we felt like we were raising two only children, because their schedules were so different. The way they socialized was they were they were in different schools, So it was really, and they loved each other, but it was they didn't get into it
Very
together.
Separate,
Mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was what it was.
Yeah.
They didn't fight, which was nice, but and we talk about it now. I think it's totally impacted who he is. I think he's a really compassionate person. And he obviously observed us raising her. And, I'm sure it'll keep unfolding what he learned and what he absorbed during those years of growing up.
And that community, maybe just so our listeners, somebody that might be interested, what is the year and the month of that New York Times article?
Oh my gosh, it was
If you know.
It was 2013. So it was 2013. I believe it was October. It was literally, and it happened literally the week that my mother passed away. So she never got to see the article. So it would have been either the first, second, or third Sunday, because it was in the style section. So I'm sure you can archive it. And the name of the home that Maris lives in is called Sweetwater Spectrum. And they have a wonderful website. It's one word, sweetwaterspectrum.org, I believe. I think it's .org. And it tells the whole history of it. And it's a new model for housing for people, adults with autism. Very much needed. It's an epidemic there are so few housing options for people on the spectrum. And the ones that are out there just often don't work for autistic people who really kind of need their own schedule. So a lot of group homes that work for some people don't work well because everybody's doing everything institutionally together, and that just doesn't work.
What do you think makes this particular configuration so workable, that it's so enjoyable? And
Well, so my daughter's been there 6 years. She moved in August of 2013. So it's been a long process because it was a new model. Everything was new. You had the organization that owns the property and runs the property. And then you have the state agencies that contract with each resident for how much care they get.
I see.
So you've got two very distinct organizations in one setting with different everything, and you've got 4 people living in a house, all cooking their own meals and all being on different schedules. I would say the first few years were very rough. Since that time, we don't have the original executive director. We have a great one now, and we changed our supported living agency. So the ones we started out with, some of it is just that it was a new model.
Yeah.
But it was, there were a lot of very hard growing pains. And I watched, my daughter kind of regress and go backwards because it was so new and so chaotic.
Yeah.
6 years into it, it's, I still advocate. I go to, I'm still very much a part of it, but I would say in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've really started letting go. But it took 3-4 years before I felt like I could pull back. Yeah. And some of it is me, and some of it was just that it was still evolving.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex situation. Now people that move in, if people move in now, they're moving into a kind of more well-oiled machine, and it's a whole different place.
Yeah.
But now my daughter calls it her permanent retirement community. I'm not leaving this place.
She's funny.
She's hilarious. She really is. It took her years to what is this place? Because everything's a metaphor to her. When she's introduced to something new, she has to liken it to something she knows. I realize I do that a lot. This is like that.
Yeah.
So she's always done that because abstract things are like, this has to remind me of something. Yeah. So when she first moved in, she called it a college campus because she'd been to the junior college. So, but then it was like, no, it really isn't because we live here. And then she called it camp because they did so many group things together, but it wasn't really camp. And then she found out it was a retirement community, which is what it's most like. In that there's a common building, you have your own rooms.
Right, yeah.
But I said, well, you need a career first, Mara, before you can retire.
That's amazing.
That's sweet.
That's so cool.
Oh.
Yeah.
She's really delightful. She's keeps me on my toes. And she comes to gigs, and she loves to come to gigs. She's very sensitive ears, so she sometimes plugs her ears, but she loves concerts. She loves rap music. Cool. She loves the chanting, she calls it.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's very
thank you
rhythmic.
for sharing about all that.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I feel very fortunate. She's really a love.
Stephanie, maybe I can ask you, I hope I can get this question out in the way I'm trying to. For listeners here that maybe have just met someone on the spectrum of autism, or maybe haven't yet, but could likely in the future. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of words as far as, wanting to connect with someone on that spectrum, and maybe what you can just say about that as far as...
Like what would be helpful to know about?
Absolutely.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, I'd be happy to. So there's some common characteristics that I would say make you have that label. And as a prelude to say, also no two are alike, because they're people with this disability rather than the disability. But yet, that being said, there's a real challenge with social understanding, reading social cues, getting the impreciseness of language. Like, we're so used to saying things and not realizing that we're being really vague about what we mean, or we're kind of lying, or it's our facial expression or our tone of voice that's really communicating what we mean, as opposed to just our words. Autistic people hear the words and decode them very logically, and it can be confusing.
Yeah. Okay.
And we infer all these things, like, I look over at you, you look like you're approving of what I'm saying, so I feel better, so I feel like,
Right.
It's very hard for them to read all of the nonverbal, gestural cues, social cues at the same time.
Right.
And so one of the ways that I try to remember to communicate is to slow down my speaking, because sometimes it's the speed at which we communicate really fast. And some of it, I believe, is that when they're very young, if you look at a baby, what babies do between the first and 18 months of being alive is they're watching, right? Their eyes they're taking in all this stuff. With autistic people that are often bombarded sensorily, they literally can't watch. Right. So all the stuff, all the just kind of being silent and observing, they have to do by not watching, because it's too much to visually take in the stimuli, orally take in the stimuli, and take in the sounds of the world. So like my daughter, part of her not looking at me was that so she could hear better. Wow. So she's looking away so that she could really understand things. Right. But somehow singing has a rhythm to it, so she could follow a repetitive pattern. But if you notice, language is very asymmetrical. And that's most autistic people. So to go back to their commonalities. So it's very hard for them to pick up social cues, social understanding, because there's too much information. A lot of them have sensory issues, meaning they hear things too loudly, and they're better at hearing than us. They almost hear more like an animal, right? So they have hyper good hearing, or bright lights bother them, or the texture bothers them.
Right.
Everything is heightened.
Okay.
So imagine like if you went into like a disco ballroom and it was always like that. Lights and loud music and people talking really fast. Mm-hmm. That's what it's like that's how it was for Maris when she was young. It was like, and they'd been in the womb, right? She used to not be able to nap unless we were in a totally quiet place. People would say, oh, I'll just carry her around. No, she couldn't fall asleep that way. And that was hard because I wanted to hold her while she fell asleep. So most autistic people have some kind of sensory issue. Most autistic people are very kind of obsessive compulsive about, not all, but have obsessive interests. And the kinds of interests they have are very categorical. So they'll study all the breeds of dogs, or they'll study all the cars, or they'll study numbers. The kind of reading they like to do is fact-based. Mm-hmm. This is that. The kind of reading that's just like if Maris would read chapter books, but if you asked predictive, like what do you think this person was feeling? It's like she'll tell you what they ate for breakfast. What do you think's going to happen in the story? That's too abstract. Right. So abstract thought is a real struggle. But people on the spectrum can be great at math or music or, things that catalog and categorize. And they'll be obsessive about it. They'll want to talk to you about their interests. And unless your interest is their interest, they won't know how to engage you. It's not like they don't want to. It's simply out of their wheelhouse.
So, like with your daughter, did you find yourself, was it difficult sometimes if she wanted to talk about something that you weren't at all interested in and
yes.
go on and on? So how did you deal with that?
Well, a lot of stuff I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested in car alarms or bird poop or anything like that. But what I would do was I would take her to appliance stores. Mm. And we would spend instead of going to another kid's going to see, whatever, we would go to the appliance store so she could see all the different kinds of machines. So I would actually help her develop her interests because that was the way into her developing conversation and relating to people. So I would, whatever interest it was, she was for a while really into alarm systems, so we would go to alarm stores. She was really interested in all the brand names and how loud a decibel they were. Well, you take her into an alarm store, and the workers there are thrilled to talk about that. So I would say, well, I sometimes, if I could tell it was really a receptive person, I would say, well, my daughter, I would say she has autism, and she's really interested in this, and if it was an intuitive person who could handle it, they would engage with her. So we'd go into music stores, and she loved seeing flutes and different kinds of flutes. And, usually there's kind of oddballs at music stores. And so they would love having someone like Maris, to talk to about all the different brand names and are they silver plated? I mean, so I realized my life was, I wanted this young person to be herself in the world, but I also had to socialize her. Yeah. And what's the balance of helping her maintain her love of herself? Because so many autistic people, especially the ones that are higher functioning and tend to be more self-aware, can develop severe depression because they know they're different and they don't want to be, and they don't understand why they're being left out. For some reason, my daughter always, she had a happy heart. And I think some of it perhaps is that I always just adored her, and I would tell her how wonderful she was, and I meant it, so that she felt so loved. And she felt that I wasn't just trying to change her out of it, even though I was. Not change, even though I was trying to teach her. And a lot of the therapies at that time when she was little was very strict behavioral training, and it was very reward and based. And I couldn't do it with her because it was, even though my daughter, I use rewards with her, it was too much that way. It felt more like training a dog. And and she was also really clever at kind of, I'll say what you want me to say to get that candy or whatever, and then when we leave this situation, I'll do what I want anyway. So she could outsmart that. And if you're going to teach someone social skills, you really want them to be able to generalize and use it. So it's much harder. It's much easier to teach reward stuff. She loves rewards and consequences and stuff. So she has something called sushi tickets at where she lives because she loves sushi. And she's an expert on sushi. And so if she does something like try something new or sit next to, she'll get sushi tickets. And when she gets enough sushi tickets, they go out for sushi and ice cream. So, we do, because she's a very structured, her life has to be ordered. So there's a place for that.
Yeah.
But it's different with each person. And it's really, there are so many therapies out there, but oh my God, we've tried them all. And some, are really brilliant and some are just off the wall. Another thing that autistic people, so in a majority, or in a plurality of people, there are what they call comorbidities. So you have autism and you have anxiety and OCD, obsessive, which my daughter has. Some people have autism and they're very developmentally delayed. Now, my daughter does have learning issues. She has some fine motor issues, and she does have some, it affects her learning, but she's not, but then she's really advanced in certain ways. She's really, she's a really advanced reader, and she plays flute, and, and what they say is your skills are scattered. So, you might have someone who's nonverbal but can do puzzles. So it's very hard to hard to know how do you measure intelligence, how do you measure value.
So yeah, and I'm thinking that maybe your question, Daniel, about if you meet somebody on the spectrum, maybe how do you connect with them would be what I'm hearing you say is that you can join in one of their interests is a good way.
And also
to drop the expectation that they're going to be interested
absolutely.
in you.
And I tell people this too, that she's nervous when she meets you. So she'll ask, like, if someone's older, she'll say, "Are you a grandma?" Or she'll say, "What kind of car do you have? Do you have any pets? What's your favorite bird?" She's got her list of kind of the way we go, "Hi, how are you? What do you do?" Right? Where do you live?
Introductory statements.
Right. So she has that. And then you might have a car that she's really interested in. And so she'll say, "What year is it? What model? Does it have this?" And then you can say something like, you answer her questions, but then you take that and you go, the reason I got into these cars, the reason I have this car is because my dad had a car like that. Then she might say, "What's your dad's name?" So you open up, instead of just answering her questions, you answer it, and then you share something personal about yourself. And she'll pick up on it. "Oh, you have a brother? Oh, you have a second car? What was your car before this? Why'd you get rid of that car?" And then you can say, "Oh, I drove that. I took a cross-country trip with that car, and I went, what state did you go to?" And that, so then, and then you can slowly gear the conversation back to then asking her something about cars. So that's with someone like Maris, who is able to do that. Another thing is to not expect them to look at you, and it doesn't mean they're not listening. So if they're looking down at the ground, they're actually listening, and they can't, and there used to be this thing of forcing people to, you have to, and that I do that with Maris now because I would say, "Maris, I want to gaze into your eyes," because she has these beautiful green eyes. And she's learned to do that and relax. I worked with her on breathing. She likes yoga and stuff like that. So you can do that as you get to know them. But they generally won't look at you, and they generally will want not you to not be so close to you. A lot of them are. But if you just act relaxed, around them. Like there's a couple of people at Sweetwater, they're not very verbal, but like one of her roommates who's an incredible artist, and I just adore her. And I just went in one day and I said, I want a hug. And her mom said, oh, she doesn't hug. And I said, I don't care. I really love you and I want a hug. And so the first time, we just touched. Well, now I'm getting full body hugs. And I just, and I wasn't going to, I was watching it. But now when I come in, she runs over to give me a hug. Yeah. And then now I've gotten, she and my daughter, they've become, to hug each other. So you just, what I tell people is don't be afraid. They're people, observe, and also don't be afraid of just being in their presence and watching them. And then saying one thing and just being next to them. It is uncomfortable, but they're just people. And I'm still learning, and because Maris is nothing like the other girls in her house. But I'm starting to see, we mothers, we parents get together and we joke about, oh God, I hate when they do that, and because they all have these similar autistic traits, but some are really verbal, some are not. So, and I'm sure you have met autistic people, because they're everywhere. But it's a lot of them, and they used to say autistic people don't really want to get close. Oh, that's just not true at all. They have the same emotions. And, there used to just be a lot of stereotypes about misinformation, or they can't lie, or they can't be deceptive. My daughter lies all the time, but she's not a good liar. Because she'll look like this. She doesn't know she's giving it away. Because, we've learned all these ways to conceal our emotions. But it's all over her face. And it's so cute.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. I thank you for asking.
Of course.
So I know that you opened for Abby Lincoln and Phoebe Snow in Ann Arbor.
Yes, years ago.
Yeah, so was that like after college? Because you went to school at Michigan.
Yes. Was it after college?
To say a little bit about what that was like.
So it was fantastic.
How it happened, like how you got the gig?
So I can't remember. I might have been in college or newly graduated because I stayed in Ann Arbor for many, many, many years after I graduated, so I can't really. But I worked with, I was in 3 different groups, or 4 different groups, because I was in a Javanese gamelan, too. I worked with a singer-songwriter that I'd mentioned before. She was a folk singer. And I met her in college. I met her in a women's studies class. And then I heard her sing at a restaurant, and she was just accompanying herself on guitar. And I said, I love your songs. And they were all originals. And I said, if you ever, want piano accompaniment. She said, well, actually, I would love that. I love the piano. So we got together, and then, boom, we were, doing stuff all the time. Cool. So there was an annual Ann Arbor Folk Festival that was a big festival of folk artists from across the country and the world, held in one of the large auditoriums. And there was also, there is still a coffee house called the Ark in Ann Arbor, which is famous. And when people tour, it's one of their stops when they're in Ann Arbor. It's just started as like literally a folk house with a beautiful old house. And then they just got so popular, they moved to a bigger house, and then they moved to something bigger. So it's really, and it was run by this folky family from, and then they retired, and their daughter, who's, probably in her mid-30s or 40s, I don't know. She took it over. And I used to perform at the Ark all the time, and with this gal, Ann. And at the Ann Arbor Folk Festival, which was a 3-day huge deal, they had, Phoebe Snow and all these people. And they asked, we were starting to get a following when we did concerts, because we just did. And they asked us if we wanted to open for Phoebe Snow at the Folk Festival. And it was one of the, and it's totally professional stage sound thing. So we did. And she's one, I just love her. And we hung out backstage, and she was just as lovely as can be. And I didn't have an extensive connection with her, but I just remember she was this really warm person, and she had this fabulous food spread in her dressing room and invited us in. And So that was that. It was really great, and I got to meet a number of folk artists, Claudia Schmidt and David. All the famous folky people. So it was really fun to kind of go to the after parties.
Yeah.
So that was really great. It was really wonderful, and I think we did that a couple of times, and then I was in a jazz duo with another woman, the woman I was telling you about, who's a music therapist. And there was a jazz competition that Eastern Michigan University, which was down the road from Ann Arbor, had a great radio jazz station called WEMU. And they had a jazz competition every year. And if you won this competition, you were guaranteed bookings, like in Detroit and around. So Kathy and I made a cassette tape. We just, in my living room, made a cassette, and we entered it. And we won Best Duo, which I had just started playing jazz. I really didn't, I learned a couple Duke Ellington tunes and a Lauren Iroh tune. So all of a sudden we had gigs,
Nice.
And it was like, oh my God. But it was really, so we were kind of learning on the job. And then a few years into it, they had a great jazz program at the university, and maybe he worked at the radio station, and he said, we need someone to open for Abby Lincoln that we're bringing to the Michigan Ballroom, and somehow we got the gig. Wow. And that was extraordinary because we were hanging out in the bathroom putting on our mascara together, and I had just adored her, and she was, again, as gracious and down to earth. I mean, she was regular people. And of course, we were nervous as heck, because it was on the big stage. But I don't even remember that performance. I think it went really well, but I think it was one of those, it just happened.
Yeah.
And then we got to hang out a little bit with her afterwards. So it was an absolute thrill. It was an absolute thrill.
What a life you have lived.
Now that I tell these stories, I think, that's not too bad.
Not
It's
too
usually just
shabby,
I'm going about my life. I'm not thinking, hey, what a life,
Yeah, these are interesting, reflective times for our guests too. It's really cool to watch. And experience that.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. I mean, because no one usually asks these kinds. You're sitting somewhere and you talk about one little episode in your life, or that day, or that week, or.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah. Well, we do usually. Do you want to ask the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question we ask a lot of the guests is if you had a musical fantasy of some sort, if you could do anything at all related to music in some fashion, what might that be for you?
What a great question. There's probably more than one thing.
Yeah, I imagine.
Wow. Well, I certainly want to do another CD, and I know that's not fantasy. I would love to compose a movie score someday. I've always wanted to do that because I have a couple of compositions that I think would be great for a movie score.
Okay, what do you imagine the movie to be like?
Oh.
What's your composition like, I guess, is the question.
I have to say I'm really big into the kind of the melancholy mood music, or music that's I've always wanted to make this is my total fantasy. A documentary road trip movie. With me and my band being on the road.
Cool.
With the scenery, kind of the Paul Simon, all gone to look for America. Yeah, because I think when I was a kid, there was something so deep and romantic and spiritual about road trips. I still feel that way, where you're just driving through different places, the world and scenery and people and times of day and desert and forest and ocean and mountains, and having music being with that, with a narrative.
Cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I don't think I've ever shared that with anybody.
Well, now the whole world knows.
Yes, exactly. You'd have heard it first here.
Well,
right?
I'm ready to do it. I don't know what anything else, but I'm so into that.
Cool. Thank you, Stephanie.
Perfect. Awesome.
Well, perhaps that's a good note to end on here. This has been absolute joy and a pleasure to have you here. We're just thrilled.
Thank you so much, both of you. What great questions, and so appreciate.
It wasn't very hard. Your story is remarkable.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's funny. I was telling my husband I'm doing this podcast. I said, I'm not really sure. And he goes, oh, well, you're not going to have any problems.
Yeah, he knows.
Just give you a microphone.
Yeah. Oh.
That's amazing. Well, thanks for being here, Stephanie. Appreciate you being here. And thanks, listeners, again, for tuning in. If you have any movies and need a composer, go ahead and hit up Stephanie, see if she's got the right stuff for you. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for listening. And we love comments and people, if you have anything, a question or a comment or any feedback, anything that you're enjoying about the podcast or any kind of constructive feedback, we'd love to know that too. We will answer we'll respond to all your comments and subscribe if you're into our podcast and spread the word. And we hope that you have some enjoyable meaningful musical conversations of your own soon. Till next time.
Bye. See you guys.